At Roosevelt Preparatory Academy, where tuition costs more than most Americans make in a year, there were two types of students: those whose families owned senators, and those whose silence could be bought with scholarships and threats. For 127 years, this system worked perfectly until they made the mistake of targeting a 17-year-old artist whose mother specialized in hunting the exact type of predators they were training their sons to become. When Bryce Wellington's hands ripped through Scarlett Hayes' blazer, exposing her to 32 phone cameras in the marble hallway where generations of future leaders had learned that consent was optional, he thought he was just preparing another scholarship girl for their basement tradition. What he actually did was trigger the end of the most sophisticated cover-up operation in American education history, because the powerless victim he was humiliating had been gathering federal evidence for 18 months and was trained to kill with her bare hands. Sometimes the revolution doesn't come from the streets. Sometimes it comes from the art room, wearing paint, stained clothes, and a smile that promises consequences. If you've ever wondered how the powerful stay protected while victims stay silent, this story will change how you see everything, because what started as one girl's prom rejection became the federal case that exposed how America's elite families have been buying their sons the right to assault with impunity for over a century. The autumn light filtering through Roosevelt Prep's Gothic windows cast long shadows across the marble floors where Scarlett Hayes moved like a ghost through hallways lined with oil portraits of dead white men who'd built their fortunes on others' backs. At 17, she possessed the kind of understated beauty that made people look twice, auburn hair that caught light like spun copper, green eyes that seemed to see everything while revealing nothing, and an artist's hands that could create beauty or, as very few people knew, deliver violence with surgical precision. She'd been at Roosevelt for 18 months now, a scholarship student among the children of senators and CEOs, navigating the invisible social boundaries that separated the worthy from the bought. Her mother worked for the government, that's all anyone knew. That's all Scarlett had ever said. What she didn't mention was that Agent Rebecca Hayes spent her days hunting institutional predators, and that her daughter's presence at Roosevelt wasn't coincidence, but carefully orchestrated infiltration. Scarlett's cover was perfect. The quiet art student who kept her head down turned in flawless work, and seemed grateful for the opportunity to breathe the same air as America's future leaders. Her portfolio was genuinely exceptional: watercolors that captured emotion with devastating honesty, charcoal sketches that revealed the soul behind the subject, but hidden in her phone was an app that looked like a meditation timer, actually a sophisticated recording device that had been capturing conversations, documenting patterns, building a federal case, one whispered, threat at a time. The predator she'd been sent to catch was more dangerous than anyone suspected. Bryce Wellington didn't just assault girls, she recruited them systematically, turning Roosevelt's basement meditation room into what his circle called their graduation ceremony space. His father's position as mayor provided political protection, his grandfather's Supreme Court connection offered legal immunity, and his family's $50 million endowment to Roosevelt ensured institutional blindness. But Bryce had made one critical error in his target selection. Scarlett Hayes wasn't just another scholarship student to break. She was a federal asset whose photographic memory had been cataloging faces, voix, and crimes since her first day on campus. Every cruel joke, every whispered plan, every casual reference to previous victims had been recorded, analyzed, and forwarded to FBI behavioral analysts who were building the kind of case that toppled dynasties. The Gothic library felt different at 4:45 p.m. on a Tuesday, when most students had fled to lacrosse practice or polo lessons. Scarlett sat alone at her usual table in the far corner, surrounded by art history books and college application materials that represented her supposed future. Yale had already accepted her, though not for the reasons they thought. The FBI had spent 3 years building her academic credentials, creating the perfect backstory for an agent who looked young enough to pass for 17 and had the training to survive whatever Roosevelt's worst could throw at her. She was deep in concentration, working on what appeared to be scholarship renewal paperwork, when the library's heavy oak doors burst open with enough force to make the medieval armor display rattle. Bryce Wellington strode in like he owned the space, which, given his family's donations, he essentially did. Behind him came his loyal enforcers, Mason Park, whose tech skills kept their crimes digital and deniable, and Hunter Cross, whose athletic build made him perfect for intimidation work. Scarlett felt her pulse steady rather than quicken. muscle memory from years of training taking over. Her emergency app activated automatically. Triggered by stress indicators, her mother had programmed into the device every word spoken in the next few minutes would be transmitted in real time to a federal monitoring station 60 miles away. Well, well, well. Bryce's voice carried across the empty library like a predator's call. If it isn't our little scholarship princess, working so hard to stay worthy of our charity. He approached her table with the casual confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences, his ice-blue eyes scanning her materials with the kind of entitled curiosity that assumed everything belonged to him. Mason and Hunter flanked him, forming a triangle that blocked her escape route, a formation they'd clearly practiced. "I've been thinking about you, Scarlett," Bryce continued, pulling out the chair across from her and spinning it backward, straddling it in a way that invaded her space while maintaining plausible deniability. "Prom's coming up, and I've decided you're going to be my date." The way he said it not as a question but as a declaration of ownership made Scarlett's training kick into high gear. She'd heard this exact tone in recordings from previous victims, the casual assumption that her body and dignity were his to claim. "That's flattering," she replied carefully, keeping her voice steady while her phone continued its silent recording. "But I already have plans that night." Bryce's smile flickered, like a glitch in a perfect mask. Mason and Hunter exchanged glances clearly. They weren't used to hearing their leader rejected by scholarship girls who should have been grateful for any attention from Roosevelt royalty. "I don't think you understand," Bryce said, leaning forward until she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the metallic scent of barely controlled rage. "I'm not asking. I'm telling you what's going to happen. You see, I've done my research on you. Little scholarship girl, your mother's government job, your perfect grades, your desperate need to stay invisible and grateful." Something cold settled in Scarlett's chest. If he knew about her mother's government work, the operation might be compromised, but she kept her expression neutral, letting him reveal how much he actually knew. "Here's what I know about girls like you," Bryce continued, his voice dropping to a register that was meant to sound seductive, but came across as threatening. "You think education is your ticket out. That if you just work hard enough and stay quiet enough, you'll escape whatever trailer park produced you. But you don't understand how the real world works." He gestured around the library, with its mahogany panels and first edition collections. "This world, the world that matters, operates on different rules. Rules where my family's name opens doors yours never could. Where my father's connections can make or break your pathetic little future with a single phone call." Hunter stepped closer, his shadow falling across her papers. "Just say yes. Scholarship girl. Make this easy on yourself." Scarlett closed her textbook slowly, gathering her materials with deliberate calm. Her training had taught her to read situations quickly, and this one was escalating beyond a simple invitation. The casual reference to her mother's job, the threatening undertones, the way they'd positioned themselves, this was a practiced routine. "I appreciate the offer," she said quietly, standing up and slipping her backpack over her shoulder. "But my answer is no. Now if you'll excuse me, I have class." She moved toward the library exit, but Mason shifted to block her path. The three boys formed a wall of privileged aggression, their expressions ranging from amusement to something darker. "You're making a mistake," Bryce said, standing as well. "Nobody rejects Bryce Wellington. Ask Ashley Morrison how that worked out for her." "Oh wait, you can't." She transferred to that boarding school in Switzerland. Very suddenly, very quietly. Scarlett felt a chill of recognition. Ashley Morrison was victim number 7 in the FBI files, a girl who'd reported Bryce's assault to school administrators and found herself facing academic probation, social ostracism, and a mysterious family financial crisis that forced her overseas. The official story was voluntary transfer. The truth was systematic destruction of a witness. "I'm sure Ashley made the best decision for her situation," Scarlett replied evenly. "Just like I'm making the best decision for mine." Bryce's mask slipped entirely then, revealing the ugly rage beneath his golden boy facade. "You have no idea what you're playing with. My family doesn't just have money, we have power. Real power. The kind that makes problems disappear and creates new realities for people who don't know their place." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be a photo gallery. "Want to see my collection? 46 girls who thought they could say no to me." Every single one learned better. Some learned quickly, some learned slowly, but they all learned. The phone screen showed thumbnail images that made Scarlett's FBI training scream warnings, photos that looked like before and after shots, girls who'd gone from confident to broken, from present to absent. Each image was marked with a date and status. Completed. Transferred. Silenced. "You're sick," Scarlett said, and for the first time, genuine emotion crept into her voice. "I'm realistic," Bryce countered. "This is how the world works when you're important enough to matter. Rules are for people who can't afford to break them. Consequences are for families who don't own judges. And consent. Well, consent is what you give when you're smart enough to understand the alternative." Mason stepped closer, his tech-savvy fingers already working on his own phone. "We could make your life very interesting." Scholarship girl. Amazing what can happen to someone's digital footprint when you know the right people. Social media accounts getting hacked, inappropriate photos appearing in college admissions databases, family members losing jobs due to mysterious background check irregularities. Hunter cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing in the empty library like breaking bones. Or we could keep this simple. Academic accidents happen all the time. Falls downstairs. Lab explosions. Food poisoning from contaminated meals. Roosevelt has such a comprehensive insurance policy for student injuries. Scarlett felt the pieces clicking together in her mind, the systematic nature of their operation becoming clear. This wasn't random harassment, this was a refined machine for breaking victims and eliminating threats. The casual reference to insurance policies suggested institutional complicity. The technology threats implied adult resources, and the photo collection indicated documentation that went far beyond teenage cruelty. 3:45 p.m. tomorrow, Bryce said, his voice returning to that deceptively casual tone. Gymnasium basement, the meditation room that's so thoughtfully soundproofed. Come alone, and maybe we can work something out that doesn't involve your mother losing her security clearance. The threat about her mother's clearance confirmed Scarlett's worst fears. They knew enough about her family to be dangerous, but it also revealed something else. They thought her mother was just another government employee, not a federal agent who'd been hunting predators like them for 20 years. "What if I refuse?" Scarlett asked, though she already knew the answer. Bryce's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Then, by Friday morning, you'll be packing for whatever sad little public school will take a transfer student with disciplinary problems. Your art portfolio will have suffered some tragic accidents. Your scholarship will be revoked due to academic integrity violations. And your mother's government career will be derailed by a very thorough investigation into her questionable associations." He gestured to Mason and Hunter. "My friends here are very good at making problems go away. They've had lots of practice. Haven't you, boys?" 46 times, Mason said proudly. "And counting," Hunter added with a grin that made Scarlett's skin crawl. The number matched the photos on Bryce's phone, confirming that this was an organized operation with a track record of success. But what they didn't know was that every word they'd just spoken had been recorded and transmitted to federal agents, who were already pulling surveillance footage and analyzing their digital footprints. "I'll think about it," Scarlett said finally, knowing that she needed to maintain her cover while giving the FBI time to coordinate their response. "Don't think too long," Bryce warned. "Offers like this don't stay available forever. And scholarship girls who waste my time tend to find their circumstances changing very rapidly." As they walked away, Scarlett heard Mason whisper to Hunter, "Basement prep tomorrow at 2 p.m. Full setup." "Roger that," Hunter replied. "Should we do the usual surveillance sweep?" "Already handled," Bryce said quietly. "Security cameras will be offline for maintenance from 3 to 5 p.m. Amazing how these old buildings have such unreliable electrical systems." Scarlett waited until they were gone, before allowing herself to process what had just happened. The casual mention of surveillance sweeps and camera malfunctions confirmed institutional involvement, while their confident discussion of previous victims suggested a level of organization that went far beyond typical school bullying. She gathered her remaining materials and walked calmly to the library's exit, her mind already working through tactical considerations. Tomorrow's confrontation would be the culmination of 18 months of careful investigation, but it would also be the most dangerous situation she'd ever faced. 3 trained predators with institutional backing versus 1 federal agent who looked like a helpless teenager. The odds should have been terrifying. Instead, Scarlett felt the cold calm that her mother had trained into her since childhood. Some people were born to be victims, others were born to hunt the ones who made victims. Tomorrow, Bryce Wellington and his crew would learn the difference. The rest of Tuesday passed in a haze of normalcy that felt surreal after the library confrontation. Scarlett attended her classes, participated in discussions about art history and European literature, even smiled appropriately when her chemistry teacher praised her lab technique. But underneath the scholarship girl facade, her mind was running tactical scenarios and survival calculations. During lunch, she noticed the changes immediately. Conversations stopped when she passed, resumed in whispers when they thought she couldn't hear. Someone had left a note in her locker that read countdown, 24 hours. Her phone buzzed with anonymous messages. Hope you're flexible. Basement's warmer than Switzerland. 40. 7's a nice round number. The harassment was designed to isolate and terrorize, but it also provided valuable intelligence. The coordination suggested advanced planning, the basement references confirmed location, and the Switzerland comment proved they were tracking her research into Ashley Morrison's disappearance. At 2:30 p.m., Scarlett made an excuse about needing art supplies and slipped away to the bathroom where she could speak freely. Her emergency app had been transmitting all day, but this required direct communication. Phoenix Base. This is Songbird, she whispered into her phone, using the code names they'd established months ago. Songbird. We've been monitoring. Status report. Target has taken the bait. Operation concludes. Tomorrow, 3:45 p.m. Gymnasium basement. 3 subjects confirmed. Institutional support probable. Request. Immediate backup authorization. Negative on backup. Songbird. Too many variables. Too much risk of compromising the broader investigation. You're authorized for defensive action only. Document everything. Survive everything. And trust your training. Scarlett felt a familiar mixture of pride and terror. The FBI trusted her enough to complete the mission alone, but that trust came with the weight of knowing that 46 other girls hadn't survived their encounters with Roosevelt's predator network. Understood. Phoenix Base. What about extraction? Local assets will be monitoring any sign of immediate danger, and we roll federal response. But Songbird, we need them to commit to federal crimes on record. This is bigger than just Roosevelt. We're tracking a network that spans 12 elite schools across 6 states. Your evidence is the keystone that brings down the entire operation. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like lead armor. She wasn't just fighting for herself or even for the 46 victims who'd suffered before her. She was the crucial piece in dismantling a systematic abuse network that had operated with impunity for decades. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that should have heralded homecoming celebrations and college application deadlines. Instead, Scarlett woke, knowing that the next 16 hours would determine whether she survived to see 18 or became victim number 47 in Bryce Wellington's collection. She dressed carefully that morning, choosing clothes that looked vulnerable but allowed full range of motion. Her mother had taught her that the best operational clothing never looked tactical, just comfortable enough to move and survive in. She braided her hair tightly, minimizing grab points, and wore her usual light makeup that made her look younger and more innocent than her 17 years. The emergency app stayed active all day, recording every interaction, every threat, every piece of evidence that would be needed for federal prosecution. By lunchtime, the harassment had escalated to open hostility. Students she'd never spoken to felt comfortable making crude comments about her upcoming appointment. Teachers who'd previously been supportive now avoided eye contact, suggesting that word had filtered through the faculty network. At 3 p.m., Scarlett received a text from an unknown number. Meditation room. Don't be late. Come alone, or your government mommy's career ends tonight. She responded simply, on my way. The gymnasium sat in Roosevelt's oldest wing, a Gothic revival building that had housed the school's athletic programs since 1927. The main floor buzzed with after-school activity, tennis practice, debate team preparations, drama club rehearsals. But the basement level was officially off-limits, accessible only through a service stairwell that required keycard access. Scarlett's stomach tightened as she descended the narrow stone steps, each footfall echoing like a countdown to confrontation. The basement smelled of old wood and fresh soundproofing, institutional cleaning products mixed with something else fear, maybe, or the accumulated terror of 46 previous victims. The meditation room sat at the end of a corridor lined with storage closets and maintenance equipment. Someone had installed expensive acoustic dampening panels on the walls, the kind used in recording studios to prevent sound leakage. A sign on the door read Meditation and Reflection Space, 20 AI. Students only, in elegant script that made the horror behind it seem even more obscene. Scarlett paused outside the door, taking a final moment to center herself mentally and physically. Her training had prepared her for this moment, but training and reality were different animals. Behind this door waited 3 predators who'd perfected their craft over years of successful hunting, backed by institutional power and family wealth that had protected them from every previous consequence. She thought about Ashley Morrison, about the 45 other girls whose photos she'd seen on Bryce's phone, about all the victims who'd been silenced by money and power and a system that valued reputation over justice. Then she thought about her mother, whose entire career had been spent hunting predators who believed they were untouchable. The door handle turned smoothly in her hand, and Scarlett Hayes stepped into the meditation room where 46 girls had learned that mercy was a luxury the wealthy could afford to withhold. But this time, the predators had chosen prey that hunted back. The room was larger than she'd expected, with expensive meditation cushions arranged in a circle around a central space that had clearly been designed for performances rather than reflection. Professional lighting equipment hung from the ceiling, cameras mounted in corners that were definitely not standard school issue, and along one wall, a display that made her blood run cold. 46 photographs, each showing a girl before and after her encounter with Roosevelt's basement tradition. The before shots showed confident young women. The after shots captured broken spirits and terrified eyes. At the center of the display, a 47th frame waited empty, with her school portrait printed and ready for mounting. Right on time, Bryce Wellington stepped out from behind a soundproofing panel, dressed casually in Roosevelt's athletic gear, as if this were just another school activity. Mason and Hunter flanked him, both carrying equipment that suggested this encounter would be recorded for posterity. "Welcome to our meditation space," Bryce continued, his voice echoing strangely in the acoustically treated room. "This is where scholarship girls learn important life lessons about gratitude, respect, and the natural order of things." Scarlett's eyes cataloged every detail, memorizing camera angles, exit point, and weapon potential in the seemingly innocent meditation equipment. Her emergency app was transmitting everything, but she knew federal response would take time she might not have if this escalated beyond containment. "Impressive setup," she said calmly, surprising them with her composed reaction. "Very professional. How long have you been running this operation?" Mason laughed, adjusting one of the cameras to frame her more clearly. "Since sophomore year, started with just Bryce and a couple friends. But word got around about how well our meditation sessions help struggling students adjust their attitudes. 46 successful meditations," Hunter added proudly. "Perfect record of behavioral improvement. Every girl who's experienced our program has left Roosevelt as a better, more grateful person." "Left" being the operative phrase, Scarlett observed, since none of them seemed to stick around for graduation. Bryce's smile sharpened. "Smart girls recognize when it's time for a change of scenery. Transfer students get fresh starts, clean slates, new opportunities to appreciate what they have instead of demanding what they think they deserve." He moved closer, and Scarlett noticed the way he carried himself, confident to the point of carelessness, secure in his belief that wealth and power made him invulnerable. It was exactly the kind of arrogance that made predators sloppy. "But you're different, aren't you?" "Scarlett, I can tell. You're not just going to disappear quietly like the others. You're going to fight back. Maybe even try to report what happens here. That's why we've prepared something special for you." Mason held up a tablet showing what appeared to be legal documents, transfer paperwork, already filled out and signed by school administration. Academic integrity violation reports that will torpedo any college applications, even a nice psychological evaluation recommending intensive therapy for reality adjustment issues. "Your mother's security clearance review," Hunter added, producing another set of documents. Amazing what kinds of character references can emerge when government employees' family members display concerning behavioral patterns. The systematic nature of their preparation was chilling, but it also revealed something crucial. They believed their power was absolute, their methods foolproof. They'd grown complacent through 46 successful operations, never considering that their next victim might be something other than what she appeared. "You've thought of everything," Scarlett said, and something in her tone made Bryce pause. She was supposed to be terrified by now, begging for mercy or trying to negotiate her escape. Instead, she sounded almost pleased. "What aren't you telling us?" "Scholarship, girl?" Bryce demanded, his instincts finally picking up on the wrongness in her reaction. Scarlett smiled then, and it was nothing like the shy, grateful expression she'd worn for 18 months. This smile belonged to someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment, who'd been counting down to this confrontation with the same anticipation a hunter feels when prey finally steps into the perfect trap. "My name is Scarlett Hayes," she said, her voice carrying a new authority that made all three boys step backward unconsciously. "I'm 17 years old. I've been training in tactical combat since I was 8, and for the past 18 months, I've been gathering evidence for a federal investigation into institutional predator networks." The color drained from Bryce's face. "You're lying. My mother isn't just a government employee, she's FBI agent Rebecca Hayes, Behavioral Analysis Unit, specializing in institutional predators who use wealth and power to hunt children. Every conversation we've had, every threat you've made, every detail about your 46 victims has been recorded and transmitted to federal agents who've been building a case against you since before you knew my name." Mason's tablet clattered to the floor. Hunter took another step back, his athletic confidence evaporating as the implications hit him. But Bryce's shock was already transforming into rage, the kind of fury that came from realizing his perfect system had been infiltrated and compromised. "You little bitch," he snarled, lunging toward her with violence replacing calculation. "You think you can destroy us? You think the FBI can touch families like ours? We own judges. We buy senators. That's when Scarlett moved, and everything the three predators thought they knew about power dynamics in that room changed forever. Bryce Wellington had been throwing his weight around Roosevelt Prep for 4 years, using his mayor father's connections and his grandfather's Supreme Court influence to turn assault into a hobby and silence into a commodity, but in the 18 seconds it took Scarlett Hayes to dismantle his entire operation. He learned the difference between inherited power and earned lethality. The first thing that shocked him was her speed. Scarlett moved like liquid mercury, flowing around his clumsy lunge with the kind of precision that came from years of federal training rather than expensive prep school athletics. Her hand caught his wrist in a grip that felt like a steel trap, redirecting his momentum so smoothly that he found himself stumbling past her into the meditation cushions. "Federal Bureau of Investigation Training Facility, Quantico, Virginia," Scarlett said conversationally as Bryce crashed into the expensive soundproofing equipment. "Age 8 through 16. Combat tactics, défensive manœuvre, and advanced threat neutralization. My mother thought I should have useful hobbies." Mason rushed her from the left, his tech-savvy fingers trying to grab her backpack and drag her down. What he got instead was a textbook judo throw that sent him flying over her shoulder to land hard on the polished concrete floor, his tablet shattering into expensive pieces around his groaning form. Judo, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Krav Maga, and tactical firearms training. Scarlett continued, never breaking stride as Hunter charged from her right. 18 months of pretending to be helpless, while you three planned the sexual assault of a federal agent. Do you have any idea how many federal crimes you've just committed on record? Hunter was bigger and stronger than his friends, a linebacker who'd never met resistance he couldn't bulldoze through. His tackle would have driven most girls into the wall. Instead, Scarlett sidestepped at the last second and used his own momentum to guide him face first into the meditation room's expensive acoustic paneling. The sound of his nose breaking echoed through the soundproof space like a gunshot. That's assault on a federal agent. Conspiracy to commit sexual assault, human trafficking, racketeering, and about 16 other felonies that carry mandatory minimum sentences, Scarlett said, watching Hunter slide down the wall, leaving a trail of blood on the previously pristine soundproofing. But please, don't let me interrupt your meditation session. Bryce had recovered from his stumble and was reaching for something behind the camera equipment, a metal rod that had probably been used to intimidate previous victims. His face was purple with rage and disbelief, the entitled fury of someone whose perfect system was collapsing around him. You can't do this to us, he screamed, swinging the rod in a wide arc that would have shattered bones if it connected. "We're protected. Our families own this town. This state. Half the federal government. You're nothing but a scholarship bitch who—" The rod never completed its swing. Scarlett ducked under it, stepped inside his guard, and delivered an uppercut that lifted him off his feet and sent him crashing into the wall display of victim photographs. 46 frames scattered across the floor, their glass fronts shattering into glittering fragments that reflected the overhead lights like fallen stars. "Actually," Scarlett said, standing over Bryce's semi-conscious form while glass crunched under her shoes, "I'm a federal agent conducting an undercover investigation into systematic institutional abuse. And you just provided the final piece of evidence we needed to dismantle your entire network." That's when Mason made his fatal mistake. Still groaning from his encounter with the floor, he managed to pull out his phone and started trying to delete files evidence that could connect him to 46 other crimes. Scarlett moved across the room like a striking snake, her foot connecting with his wrist in a kick that sent the phone flying into the wall where it shattered beyond any hope of data recovery. "Destruction of evidence in a federal investigation," she said pleasantly. "That's another 5 to 10 years. Assuming you live long enough to stand trial," Mason whimpered, cradling his probably broken wrist against his chest. Hunter was still unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady through his shattered nose, and Bryce was slowly regaining consciousness, his ice blue eyes struggling to focus on the federal agent who just destroyed his perfect predator operation. "You don't understand," he mumbled through lips that were already swelling from her uppercut. "My grandfather sits on the Supreme Court. My father controls half the state legislature. We have senators on speed dial and federal judges at family barbecues. Whatever evidence you think you have will disappear. Whatever charges you file will be dismissed. And you'll spend the rest of your short life in a federal prison cell for assaulting the wrong people." Scarlett knelt beside him, close enough that he could see the cold satisfaction in her green eyes. "Your grandfather, Justice Wellington? The one who's about to resign in disgrace when the FBI releases recordings of him discussing judicial decisions with lobbyists? Your father, Mayor Wellington? The one who's been taking bribes from your assault victims' families to ensure their silence? Your family connections aren't protection anymore. Bryce, they're just more evidence in our RICO case." The horror that crossed his face was almost worth 18 months of pretending to be helpless, almost worth watching 46 other girls suffer while she built the case that would destroy him. Almost worth the nightmares she'd have about the photos on his phone for the rest of her life. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "Our operation is perfect. We've been running it for years without a single problem. No one's ever gotten close to exposing us. No one's ever even tried to fight back." "That's because you've been hunting civilians," Scarlett replied. "Scholarship girls who had no training, no backup, no resources to fight institutional power. But I'm not a victim. Bryce, I'm a weapon. And you just brought a prep schoolboy's entitled rage to a federal agent's expertise in neutralizing threats." She stood up, looking down at the 3 broken boys who'd terrorized their way through 4 years of high school believing that money and privilege made them invulnerable. Mason was crying now, his wrist clearly fractured and his tablet destroyed. Hunter remained unconscious, blood from his nose pooling on the floor around his head, and Bryce stared up at her with the dawning realization that his perfect life was over. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation has been tracking your network for 3 years," Scarlett continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent months preparing for this moment. 12 elite schools across 6 states, all running variations of your basement operation, all protected by wealthy families who thought they could buy silence and justice in equal measure, all about to learn that some crimes are too big for even Supreme Court connections to cover up. That's when she heard footsteps in the corridor outside, multiple sets moving with the kind of tactical precision that suggested federal response teams rather than school security. Her emergency app had been transmitting everything, and apparently her handlers had decided that 40 minutes of recorded federal crimes was sufficient evidence to justify immediate intervention. "Agent Hayes," a voice called through the soundproof door. "FBI, are you secure? 3 subjects neutralized," she called back. "Ready for custody transfer." The door burst open, revealing 8 federal agents in full tactical gear, led by a woman whose resemblance to Scarlett was unmistakable. Agent Rebecca Hayes had spent 20 years hunting institutional predators, and the satisfaction on her face as she surveyed the meditation room, suggested that this was the case she'd been building toward her entire career. Bryce Wellington. Mason Park. Hunter Cross, she said, reading from a tablet while her team secured the crime scene. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit sexual assault, human trafficking, racketeering, assault on a federal agent, and about 30 other federal crimes that will ensure you spend the next 40 years in federal prison. As the agents cuffed the three boys, Scarlett noticed something that made her training pay off in ways she'd never expected. Bryce's expensive Roosevelt blazer had torn during their fight, not enough to be inappropriate, but enough to reveal the expensive undershirt beneath. It was a small detail, meaningless in the context of federal arrests and lifetime prison sentences, but somehow symbolically perfect. His entitled world had been ripped apart by someone he'd dismissed as powerless, his perfect system destroyed by the kind of victim he'd never imagined possible. The metaphor was almost too obvious, but sometimes reality delivered the poetry that fiction could only aspire to. Agent Hayes, her mother said, using Scarlett's operational designation, even though they both knew this was the end of her undercover career. Exceptional work, 18 months of deep cover, 0 operational mistakes, and evidence that will dismantle the largest institutional predator network in U.S. history. Just doing my job, Scarlett replied, though they both knew that surviving 18 months of psychological warfare while building a federal case required skills that most adults would never possess. How many schools are we taking down? 12 institutions, 47 faculty members, 23 board members, and 86 students who participated in systematic assault operations. Her mother replied grimly, Your evidence broke the case open, but what you documented here connects to networks we've been tracking for decades. Roosevelt Prep was the keystone that held the entire system together. As federal agents photographed evidence and secured the crime scene, Scarlett looked around the meditation room one final time. The wall of victim photographs lay shattered on the floor. 46 girls whose suffering had built the case that would ensure justice for hundreds more. The expensive equipment that had recorded their humiliation would now serve as evidence in federal court, and the soundproofing that had hidden their screams would be removed as part of a complete institutional renovation. What happens to Roosevelt now? She asked. Federal Zeitzer under RICO statutus. Her mother replied, The school's assets will be liquidated to pay victim compensation, and the property will be converted into a federal training facility for institutional abuse prevention. Seemed fitting. Agent Rebecca Hayes approached her daughter with the kind of pride that came from watching 18 months of dangerous work finally pay off. But there was also sadness in her eyes, the recognition that Scarlett's undercover career was over before her 18th birthday, ended by success rather than failure. You did something remarkable here, she said quietly. 46 girls who thought they'd never get justice will see their attackers in federal prison. Hundreds of potential future victims will be protected by the institutional changes your evidence will trigger. And a system that's operated with impunity for over a century just learned that money can't buy immunity from federal prosecution. As they walked out of the meditation room together, leaving behind the broken remnants of Roosevelt's predator network, Scarlett felt the weight of 18 months finally lifting from her shoulders. She'd survived the most dangerous undercover operation in FBI history, exposed systematic institutional abuse, and delivered justice for victims who'd been silenced by wealth and power. But more than that, she'd proven that the next generation of federal agents could infiltrate and dismantle systems that previous investigators had never been able to touch. Elite institutions that had hidden behind tradition and privilege would now face federal oversight, designed by agents who understood exactly how predators operated. The news broke within hours. By 6 p.m. that evening, every major network was running stories about the federal raid on Roosevelt Preparatory Academy. By midnight, social media was exploding with testimonials from former students at elite schools across the country, sharing stories of institutional abuse that had been hidden for decades. Within a week, the Department of Education had announced sweeping reforms requiring federal oversight of all private institutions receiving any form of government funding. Within a month, 12 elite schools had lost their accreditation and faced federal takeover. Within 6 months, The entire landscape of American elite education had been permanently altered by evidence gathered by a 17-year-old federal agent who'd infiltrated the most dangerous social circle in prep school history. Bryce Wellington pleaded guilty to 47 counts of federal crimes rather than face trial, with evidence that included recordings of him describing previous assaults in explicit detail. He received 65 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, a sentence that ensured he'd die behind bars. Mason Park and Hunter Cross received 30-year sentences after cooperating with federal prosecutors to identify other networks operating at schools across the country. But the most satisfying justice came from watching the institutional collapse that followed. Roosevelt Preparatory Academy's 127-year history ended with federal seizure and conversion into a training facility where future agents would learn to identify and infiltrate institutional predator networks. The irony was perfect. The building that had hidden systematic abuse for over a century would now train the agents who'd prevent such abuse in the future. Justice Wellington resigned from the Supreme Court 3 days before the FBI released recordings of him discussing case outcomes with lobbyists connected to Roosevelt's board. Mayor Wellington was indicted on 43 counts of corruption and bribery, facing a federal investigation that would likely end with lifetime imprisonment. The entire Wellington political dynasty collapsed within a month, their name becoming synonymous with institutional corruption rather than elite power. For Scarlett, the transition from undercover agent to public advocate brought challenges she'd never anticipated. Congressional testimony about institutional abuse patterns, interviews with major media outlets about federal infiltration techniques, speaking engagements at law enforcement conferences where her Roosevelt operation became a case study in successful deep cover work. But the most meaningful recognition came from the letters, hundreds of them, from survivors of institutional abuse who'd found the courage to speak up after seeing her story, from parents who'd questioned elite school practices they'd previously accepted as tradition, from young women who'd decided to pursue federal law enforcement careers after seeing what was possible when training met opportunity. Yale University had offered her admission before they knew her real identity, when they thought she was just another scholarship student with exceptional artistic talent. After her federal operation became public, they created an entirely new program around her experience, a joint degree in criminal justice and behavioral psychology that would prepare future agents to infiltrate and dismantle institutional predator networks. She accepted, not because she needed their validation, but because the FBI had bigger plans for her education: advanced degrees in psychology and criminal justice, specialized training in institutional infiltration techniques, and eventually a leadership role in the Bureau's new Institutional Predator Task Force unit, created specifically to hunt the networks her Roosevelt operation had exposed. On the 1-year anniversary of Bryce Wellington's arrest, Scarlett stood in the Roosevelt Prep building that had been converted into the Federal Training Center for Institutional Abuse Prevention. The Gothic windows still cast long shadows across marble floors, but now those floors echoed with the footsteps of federal agents learning to identify and infiltrate predator networks rather than wealthy students learning that privilege trumped consent. The meditation room had been converted into a lecture hall where recordings of her Roosevelt operation were played for new agents as examples of successful deep cover technique. The wall where victim photographs had once hung now displayed a memorial to the 46 girls whose suffering had built the case that changed everything. Agent Rebecca Hayes joined her daughter in the converted meditation room, both women reflecting on how 18 months of dangerous work had transformed not just their careers, but the entire landscape of institutional accountability in America. "Any regrets?" her mother asked. Scarlett considered the question seriously. 18 months of pretending to be helpless while watching others suffer, 46 victims whose pain she documented but couldn't prevent, 3 predators whose systematic abuse she'd enabled to continue while building evidence for their eventual prosecution. "None," she said finally. "Every day I pretended to be weak. Every threat I endured. Every moment of horror I witnessed, it all led to this. 46 victims got justice. Hundreds of potential future victims were protected. And a system that operated with impunity for over a century learned that federal agents can look like anything, be anyone, and infiltrate anywhere." She looked around the room where so much suffering had occurred and so much justice had been delivered, where a shy scholarship girl had revealed herself to be a federal weapon, where entitled predators had learned that money couldn't buy immunity from consequences, and where institutional abuse had met its match in federal precision. Sometimes, she continued, the revolution doesn't come from the streets. Sometimes it comes from the meditation room, wearing paint-stained clothes and a smile that promises justice. The Roosevelt Prep case became the template for federal infiltration of institutional predator networks, a blueprint that would protect countless future victims and ensure that elite education could never again hide systematic abuse behind tradition and privilege. And at the center of it all was a 17-year-old federal agent who'd proven that the most dangerous weapons in law enforcement weren't guns or badges, they were intelligence, training, and the absolute refusal to let predators continue hunting with impunity. Bryce Wellington had thought he was adding victim number 47 to his collection. Instead, he'd handed federal prosecutors the evidence that dismantled the largest institutional predator network in American history. Sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted, and sometimes justice wears paint-stained clothes and delivers consequences with a roundhouse kick that echoes through marble halls for generations. The girl they'd tried to break had broken their entire world instead. And in federal training facilities across the country, new agents would learn her techniques, study her methods, and carry forward the lesson that no institution is too powerful, no predator too protected, and no victim too powerless when federal justice decides to hunt. If Scarlett's courage, quiet determination to devastating precision reminds you that voices matter more than institutional power, or someone needing to hear victims aren't powerless against predatory systems, share her story. Every shared experience builds communities where predators can't hide.